This week's show brought to you by my 96 IV Mewtwo. I've had a good day. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. It's all over but the crying. We're going to have lots to speculate about, but I'm going to give you fair warning. Enjoy this. Enjoy this time right now. You might complain about all the rumors and myths in the off-season mill, but NBA fans, we come to you from the past where we have seen this all before. Enjoy this time, and as I've warned you, myself, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers, and my co-host, voice of God, man in many hats, Brian Foster. Hey, say, Brian.
What's going on, Dre?
As I've warned in past shows, like in 2 months, we're going to be a political talk show. For those of you that don't know, Brian is a political scientist, an expert of all things political. He actually knows who like secretaries of states are, unlike me. So in a few weeks, we're going to be a political podcast show. So full warning. Enjoy the basketball talk. I
want to correct one thing there. I'd say a political scientist is someone who's an academic, probably with a PhD or some kind of doctorate. I am not that. I am just someone who likes politics.
So I'll throw some shade here. We will use this as an example of how the sports world gets effed up versus the real world. So as an example, you very wisely stepped in and said, hey, this is not my field, whatever. You'll notice that, for instance, Nate Silver is often referred to as an economist in the sports science field, whereas Dave Barry has noted he just has his, bachelor's degree. And there are lots of statistical experts that don't have that level of experience. And I'm just going to keep throwing shade. It's the offseason, Brian. Let's do it. Like one of our favorite analysts is Kevin Pelton, who has like no formal background training. And if you read his work on statistical analysis, it shows the number of people in sports that say they can be experts. There's no vetting. You just get to say it. And unlike other fields, we're both Silicon Valley types, right? You're in the Bay. I've worked for Google in the past. There is some level of vetting that makes sure you understand at least some level of technology. Fans of the show, the IT Crowd, that's one of my favorites, a British show. Didn't get an Office-style remake in the United States. They attempted it, and it was terrible. But, people that are familiar with like Silicon Valley, there's at least some vetting to make sure you understand what a computer is. In the sports field, there is no vetting to make sure you understand stats. And there are so many. I have a backlog of things to talk about, Brian, where I'm just like, the way this statistic is normally done in the mainstream sports field is just off, and it's baffling.
Oh, and now we've got the whole offseason for that.
We do.
I want to point that out. You'd think that, the playoff season is a great time for Warriors fans with how good the team is right now coming off this title. But no. We are trained due to decades of failure that the offseason is the real season. So now that this stupid playoffs is done with, now we can enjoy the real NBA season. So I'm very happy about this offseason.
All right, so I'm just going to give a quick rundown of topics, and then we'll jump right in. And we'll see if we actually do it in order. Last week I did that, and we went completely out of order. We're going to talk the finals. We're going to talk the offseason in particular, what LeBron's going to do, what Golden State is going to do, what Kawhi is going to do, what Steve Ballmer is going to do. See lots of news. We're going to talk some new head coaches that, Brian, I'm not even caught up on, so this is going to be you talking. And then we're going to bash Kobe, because why not? All right, so anyway, let's hop into the finals. Now, here's one thing that impressed me. Kevin Durant won finals MVP. And so for those of you that remember last week's show, we basically hopped in, and I believe it was a 2-0 hole last week when we started.
That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, so it's a 2-0 hole. LeBron James has literally done everything, and that gets interesting. We'll talk more about that in a second. So he's literally done everything, and that still wasn't enough to win. Then in game 2, Steph Curry puts up a finals record number of threes, and they crush them. And then let's see. So then what ends up happening? Game 3, Kevin Durant comes back, puts up an amazing, it was 1 point a minute. I think he played 43 minutes, got 43 points. And this was also kind of spirit crushing. I kind of want to give an aggregate point. As despite the fact that Brian was the most wrong, he pulled the classic Jeremy Britton. So for those of you who don't know, it has been a tradition of the Wages of Wins to have at least one Golden State homer that kind of helps us out. And the first one that ever did this was Jeremy Britton. He's still written some of my favorite pieces over of Wages of Wins, and I think the first one he wrote was, "Can the Warriors be a 50-win team?" And he did this right after they acquired David Lee And so we were high on optimism. And for those, and as you were mentioning, Warriors fans, traditional Warriors fans, Brian, you'll remember this was right before, for instance, Joe Lacob and Chris Mullins were booed at a jersey retirement ceremony. So that Jeremy came in full of optimism. That was smacked down. Then Jeremy, when Bob Myers was hired as GM, he came back and was like, is Bob Myers even going to do anything? He's just saying trite cliches. And then, of course, that backfired. So the rule of the Wages of Wins group is we always have to have a Golden State Warriors fan who is very intelligent, who is very grounded in statistics, who makes very calm, rational, well-thought-out explanations about predictions that are invariably proven wrong and will make them look silly. And so yours was, you said you thought that the current Warriors core, the best number of wins in terms of the finals that you would put them at was probably 0. And
right, I did say this before the Houston series. To be fair,
the Houston and here was the counter that I had that I'm happy I was right about. I basically said, actually, not even true. The actual point is we have no idea because all of this is incumbent on how healthy Steph Curry is. And luckily for the Warriors, Steph Curry came back healthy. But I can't fault you for saying the Houston Rockets are one of the top 30 teams all time. I keep stressing this. This season had one of the best teams in NBA history not win a title. And I keep throwing that back to anybody bitching about Kevin Durant or the Warriors, about the super team and unfairness, where in NBA history, there have been multiple top 30 teams. This is all time. Like, I just want you to understand, like, top 30, to be mean, like, we argue Kobe might be a top 20, top 30 NBA player all time. So a top 20, top 30 all-time regular season team has failed in the playoffs. It's really unlucky. One of the funnier ones, Brian, because I'm in Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Bucks have two of those, have two of the top 25 teams all time that, didn't win a finals. So that happens, and it's because so much rests on the shoulders or ankles, as it would be, of very talented players, and if they get dinged up at the wrong time, that can completely cost them. So that was my retort, and I ended up being right, but I didn't fall to saying the Houston Rockets are one of the greatest teams in NBA history. The Golden State Warriors, they're in flux right now. We don't know how healthy Steph Curry is going to be, and lo and behold, what had to happen? Steph Curry had to come back healthy, which was key, and Chris Paul had to get injured. So you're I'm going to go off on a tangent, Brian, as I'm prone to do, as you know. This reminds me very much of the Kevin Love for Klay Thompson trade. And in fact, I might use this as an excuse.
This is a good analogy.
I might use this as an excuse to talk something important in the offseason that was next subject. So we might do that and come back. So anyway, the way it works is back in the day, Kevin Love was like, I'm not coming back to the Minnesota Timberwolves. My take was the Timberwolves should have said, F it. We're going to go all in with Kevin Love this season. We're going to spend some money. We're going to sign in Amir Johnson and JJ Redick and see what we can do. That's not what they did. They traded him for a bunch of crappy assets and managed to make it all the way back to the number 1 pick again. So that worked out. But one of the potential trade partners was Klay Thompson. And the Warriors were pretty staunch and said no. Now, the reason this ended up being, I'll put in quotes, right, was a few reasons. Klay Thompson ended up signing a very favorable contract that no one at the time knew he would sign. So that's one. That was key. He signed a very favorable contract that managed to work out well going into the massive television deal rise with also no salary smoothing, which meant Klay Thompson's contract went from being an overpriced contract that we weren't a fan of to being gold in the new CBA because they could target a player like Kevin Durant. 2, Draymond Green, under a new coach, got an increase of minutes and saw a dramatic increase in production. So if we hop onto BoxscoreGeeks.com, by the way, a new feature, Patrick is doing gangbusters and adding new stuff to the site. We have playoff data for the last season. We now have pictures pulled from their Twitter feed and some more data. So Draymond Green, in his first 2 seasons with the Warriors, he was an above-average rookie. So, like, as an example, significantly better than Donovan Mitchell. His second year, he was an average NBA player, average bench player, I'll stress. And then in his third season, 2015, he is a really good player. And in that season where they won 73 games, he's a star. He plays really good last year in 2017 and was a good player this year. So essentially, the reason the Kevin Love trade worked out and everybody gets to say I was wrong, which I don't agree with, is Kevin Love wasn't in a good role on Cleveland and got injured, so he looked worse than he was. Draymond Green improved dramatically and was able to fill the role that Kevin Love would have filled. So essentially, Kevin Love would have been redundant on that squad because Draymond Green did most of the stuff Kevin Love would have done, which is huge. And then Klay Thompson managed to take a favorable contract. So it's like you saying I was wrong requires you saying, well, all of this other stuff fell the Warriors' way to make it look better. That's being results oriented instead of process oriented. We probably would have said, you know what? There is no, this is the key. There is no guarantee of the future. There is no guarantee that there's going to be another player or another finals. We just mentioned the Rockets missed one of their best shots of winning a title. I'm not yelling at them for that. I'm just saying that's the point. This thinking about, well, we'll be better in the future and that'll be fine because this player will be healthier, this player better. That is foolish thinking. I am always, and this is one of these topics that's definitely going to come up in the offseason, Brian. I am always a think about this season in the NBA. That's always my take. So with that point of what you were saying, the reason you look wrong and we get to point our fingers to the laugh is a bunch of stuff fell the Warriors' way that you could not have reasonably called ahead of time. So
yeah, if we were able to teleport back in time to before the Golden State and Houston series, and I would have had this piece of information, from a time traveler in the future saying, yeah, we can promise you that Curry's going to be healthy and play really well in a lot of these games. I think he came back game 3 or game 2, something like that. Anyway, and that Paul was going to be hurt and miss significant games. Yeah, I would have been like, okay, well, my priors are different. I think the Warriors are more than 50% to win the title. So
to fairness, we did that immediately after they beat it. You were like, well, clearly I was wrong. Here's what happens. I still don't think your take. So let me ask you.
I think it was correct at the time.
I love that. And so here's the take I'm going to make you update because, why not? We always got to make you look silly, Brian. And it's going to lead us into the topic we're about to talk, which is Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, the two people that made the Kevin Love trade look wrong. They might favor into the Warriors' future in a second here. Do you think that zero? Are you going to update your prior now again that zero is probably still again the likely title outcome for the current Warriors core to win in the next 3-4 years?
No, that's tough because I think it's not. I think it's 1 is more likely now.
And so why? And just out of curiosity, why have you updated it to 1?
Well, just because of what they have coming into this offseason. It seems like they're going to have Curry and Durant for sure. They have Curry already. Durant has reiterated a million times, even at the parade today, he's coming back. And they still have Thompson and Green. And they could trade them. We're going to talk about that in a little bit and could screw up that trade, but it seems unlikely. It seems more likely they'll trade them for someone really good like Anthony Davis or wait, kick the can down the road till next offseason and take it, run it back with the same team they have now. So I think kind of based on what they have and what the off-season rumors are, which again we'll talk about, yeah, I think it is likely that they could win a title the next year or two.
I would still say that I don't like. So the way to phrase this, and this may become a piece that I've been kicking to Brian. So if those of you like it, tell him on Twitter, tell him in the comment section that you think Dre has a brilliant idea because my ego needs more massaging. I called it the Brian's bar pool picks. And so just a reminder, a classic thing. This was the premise of the first movie Deadpool is, in a bar, there's a chalkboard somewhere. You've got a pool of, possible outcomes in some sporting event. Deadpool was about hitmen, but, in real world, it'd be like which team is going to, win some bowl game or, which fighter is going to win whatever. And there you just get to buy a square in this pool. And, there might be odds on it if it's more gambling or it might just be simple. I don't hate the notion of zero for the Warriors, as I still don't think it's bad because, one, winning a title is really hard and requires a lot of luck. And there's still a lot of good teams in the NBA, and we're definitely going to talk those in a second. I'm actually going to I'm going to apologize, Brian. Why don't we finish up the finals? I preemptively started getting into Draymond. Get there in a second, but I realize it's way too easy to take that to the rest of the offseason topics, and we have a lot to talk. I just want to. So this entirely started with me talking about how right you were, and then I took a 30-minute tangent to talk about how wrong you've been in the past. But the right thing is, you had some keys for success to the Cavaliers, and essentially what you said is their hope was to play big and hope that the Warriors played small. And here is just the key.
And I want to hope for luck. The luck was the big part. That playing that way would increase the ceiling of their luck, basically.
Now, game 1. It went to overtime. So they lost by 10, but it was an overtime game. I'm going to try and start reading some numbers off. I'm doing this live, Brian, so it's kind of hard. But in game 1, the Golden State Warriors played I hate how the site's load. But anyway, the Golden State Warriors played Kevon Looney only 24 minutes. They played Sean Livingston 18 minutes. They played Nick Young 10. It's a little misleading. So basically, they played Sean Livingston and Nick Young 28 minutes. They played Kevon Looney, Jordan Bell, a combined 36 minutes. It basically averaged out to about 46 minutes on their bigs, but that's because they went to OT. So, but anyway, they played Nick Young and Sean Livingston more minutes than a big. And again, that's a very, very close game, goes to overtime. They managed to squeak it out. That, you know, the opposite of what you're saying. The Cavaliers needed luck. What ended up happening is the Warriors got luck. Now, game 2 is an absolute smoting, however, whatever the proper way to say that is. They start JaVale McGee, which is huge. He plays 18 minutes. Off the bench, Sean Livingston and Nick Young combined for 29, still not good, but it's JaVale McGee, 18 minutes. Kevon Looney, 12 minutes. David West is huge, 11 minutes. Jordan Bell, 11 minutes. So, you know, those four guys, and then actually Zaza Pachulia plays 4. So they essentially almost play a big 48 minutes of time, and lo and behold, that game's a blowout. They win by almost 20. Game 3, and this game is close. What's funny about both overtime games and close games is, you know, they're closer than they appear because at the end you're fouling intentionally. I believe this game got within 1 with under 3 minutes to go, if I recall.
This is the best game of the series by far, yeah.
Okay, so game 3. And by the way, for nothing, I'd say Kevin Durant won MVP, and that was the shocker to us. I think this game earned it because, you know, legitimately game 1, the Warriors won because of J.R. Smith. Basically, if you're like gonna give credit to the wins, like game 1 is J.R. Smith. Game 2, yes, Steph Curry is the best player in the game, but you could have, like, here's what's nuts about game 2. You could have taken Steph Curry off and they probably still would have won. Game 3, they win because of Kevin Durant, and we'll get to game. But so anyway, game 3, it requires Kevin Durant has 82.4% true shooting percentage. That is ridiculous, even against the bad bad defense Cleveland Cavaliers. But then here they do start JaVale McGee, but he only plays 14 minutes. And then we get Sean Livingston. Actually, this one was kind of weird, but yeah, Sean Livingston gets 17 minutes. I actually do have nothing. This game was just out of luck. I was going to say it seemed like they played small, but actually they started JaVale McGee, so I'm just wrong. But essentially, the 2 games that they played really big, and I'm going to go to the next one just to confirm this really quick, Brian, because I might be wrong. I might be misremembering. But yeah, they start JaVale McGee again, 16 minutes. Jordan Bell, 18 minutes. David West, 8 minutes. Kevon Looney, 3 minutes. You know, the 2 games that they basically gave over 40 minutes to their bigs proper without needing OT, they blew them out. And the 2 games that they didn't were closer games. Now, in all of the games, they were much better teams. They were a much better team, and it really wasn't that close, barring one of the most amazing performances in finals history from LeBron James. But that being said, you know, that I do want to give you that, where it's just kind of like, what's kind of sad about this squad and even going forward is, I think that if they just played kind of a very robotic coaching style of playing kind of the best lineups and playing big, they would win bigger. But I think one of the problems this is a smart people problem, by the way. Smart people like to tinker. Smart people like to say I can't be on autopilot, right? It's not comfortable for me to say. So, for instance, Lacob, Myers, and Kerr could say, look, we scouted the best players. We got the best players. We've trained them with the best offense. Now all we have to do come game time is give them their rotations. This is something I always come back to with Art Rondeau, one of friends of the show and an NBA coach and shooting coach, where he's just kind of says one of the things that can be important to players playing well is you get them in a rhythm, you get them in a zone. And the easiest way to do that is if they have a regular schedule. You're going to play these minutes. You're going to get off the court now. You're going to play these minutes. I'm not going to crack the whip and yell at you because that can backfire. And the funny thing is, you tell a coach, just calm down and do nothing. Remember, Phil Jackson, one of the greatest coaches in NBA history, he was called the Zen Master because that's what he'd do. He'd let the guys play. He'd basically give them rotations. He wouldn't call timeouts, freak out. He would just go, when the game starts, I'm just going to be calm and let the players play. And I feel a lot of coaches could do that, but I understand it because as a smart person myself, one of the most annoying things to do is just to sit still and do nothing.
Yeah, and interestingly, the Warriors were known for halftime adjustments this year, right? They famously come out and outscore their opponents big time in the third quarter. Now, I haven't looked at data to say if that's like just an eye test or actually a real pattern. But yeah, that's one of the things they do. Now, here's the thing about this series, though. So for this plan of Cleveland's to work, they needed to dominate on the possession side of the ball, right, with rebounding and block shots and whatnot, and turnovers. They weren't able to do that in all of the games because, like you said, those Warriors big players and their smalls as well took care of it. So that avenue was shut down. And then the second avenue was basically getting lucky with the efficiency side, right? The other half of winning. That didn't happen either. We knew they were going to need some luck because playing their big players in order to compete on the possession side, might hurt their defense. But, even if they'd played better on defense, I'm not sure if it would have mattered. 58.8% effective field goals, Dre, for the series for Golden State, 45.9 for Cleveland. No matter what lineups you play or what happens there, you just can't overcome that. That's too big of a margin.
Well, and I mean, and again, to just come back to what we were saying about the key for their success the whole way. If you just have good players, that is always one of my favorite footsteps in NBA analytics history is I got in a fight with Mark Cuban in the comment section about picking up Chris Kaman. And by the way, no one ever came back and said I was right. I'm still bitter about this. But I actually said to Mark...
To be fair, he's got bigger things to worry about these days. But go ahead, Trey.
We'll leave the... Actually, while I'm throwing shade, let's stay in fair ball territory, right? Let's stay in basketball. Why does nobody bitch about the Dallas Mavericks essentially letting the Warriors upgrade to Zaza Pachulia and Kevin Durant? Because for those of you that don't remember, the Warriors had to clear cap to get Kevin Durant, and what they ended up doing is they traded Andrew Bogut to the Dallas Mavericks and with a pick or something. So it was a salary dump. And then because they did that, the Mavericks either had released Zaza ahead of time or because of that released Zaza Pachulia. And then he took a discount to play for the Warriors to chase a title. So it's like nobody talks about the fact that not only were the Warriors light years ahead in terms of doing things like giving Klay Thompson that contract that we're complimenting, but other GMs were complicit in their moves. It's not hard to go, hey, you guys just won a freaking title and are trying to clear cap space heading into one of the most important off seasons. No, in fact, one of the lines we've heard is that Kawhi Leonard, that allegedly Popovich doesn't want to trade him to the Los Angeles Lakers. He still has a year left on his deal. So if Kawhi wanted to go to the Lakers, the Spurs would have to facilitate it. And they're going, we don't want to trade you to a rival, despite the fact that the Lakers have not been a rival in years. But that point is, other teams had to facilitate the Warriors getting that cap space that they had to sign Kevin Durant. And when we see fingers being pointed at Kevin Durant or the Warriors for super teams, I'm amazed more people don't do that way. But yeah, so anyway, I got in a fight with him about Chris Kaman, and I just said that. I said, the key way to win in the NBA, all other analytics aside, is you start with getting good players. It's get good ingredients. You want to get good coaching. You want to come up with other clever analytics tricks. You want to come up with lineup drinking, fine. But you've got to start with productive players. And the Warriors did that. And that's what, Patrick said this last week. I'm going to reiterate this point. Signing Kevin Durant was huge because everybody is acting like the Warriors winning a title this year was a foregone conclusion, despite the fact that they were a game away from elimination. It is ridiculous to me how results.
They were down double digits in Game 7 too. Let's not forget that.
I enjoyed this series of takes. So when the Rockets lost the first game to the Warriors, people were like, it's all over. The Warriors are going to win a title. And then the Rockets came back and it was like, who knows what's going to happen. And then similar thing happened in the finals. Game 1, people were like, after game 2, people were like, Steph Curry is going to win MVP. And then 2 games later, people were like, the number of times people just get overly excited about something being a surefire thing with very little data amuses me. And then the same thing. With very little data, they look back and assure you how fair it was. So anyway, I'm trying to think of what more I want to say on the finals. Durant.
Well, just on that last point, Dre, there's just this idea out there that somehow playoffs or crunch time, the last minutes of the game or the last games of the season are somehow different. And what happens there is all that really matters. So you can just ignore all this other data and only focus on who's clutch or whatnot. And come on, anyone who listens to this show knows that's a ridiculous way to think now. But yet, if you're on Twitter and Reddit or even watching network or cable sports, you see it all anyway happen over and over again. So yeah, the idea that the Warriors ruined the NBA is going to be the narrative all off season, and it's so dumb considering how close they were to not winning the title this year.
I mean, one thing that did happen, just another tangent, is, I mean, if you look at the ratings, at least for the first couple of games, they were fairly consistent with previous years. And that's huge because the NBA Finals are the most popular they've been in years. I mean, the NBA is as popular as it has been post-Jordan. And a huge part of that is that we're just never going to return to that era. Another popular thing that happened around the same time was wrestling, which we'll talk in a bit. The Attitude Era happened in the late 90s and is kind of considered the golden age of wrestling, at least in terms of popularity. And I think it's just important to remember that, the Attitude Era in wrestling, Michael Jordan in basketball, there was this perfect kind of time that was this kind of shows up in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, I believe. Yeah, I think that's the one. Yeah, Outliers, where it's just kind of like it wasn't just an amazing superstar like Michael Jordan in NBA and like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin in WWE. It was like a perfect star at the perfect time in the perfect place. And it's like, we're never going to see sports return to that era. And we know a lot of things, right? Like, there are so many other avenues of entertainment that we have access to that every sport has to compete with. We're not going to go back to the old eras. Major League Baseball being America's pastime, a lot of that had to do with the fact there was nothing else to do. And now there's a lot of other stuff to do, and it turns out baseball is pretty damn boring. I said it. So I think what's important is, if you look at basketball's revenue from television money, if you look at their ratings from who's actually watching, it's doing great. And another thing that kind of bugs me is I keep comparing it to wrestling, Brian. That's going to be the theme of this week's show. But in wrestling, what's a common term is what's known as a smart person, person who knows the inside. And there's like a smark, which a mark is a person who falls for storylines in wrestling because obviously it's scripted. So if you believe it's real, you're wrong. A smark is a person who knows insider stuff, but then still gets too invested. Now, what ends up happening in NBA is a lot of people like, I'm sick of this finals. And what bugs me about that take is it's not just for you. There are other people that watch. And by the way, there are people that didn't turn into last year's finals that turned into this year's finals because they know who LeBron James is. As an example, my wife and I went to see Ronda Rousey, I think when she won her 9th or 10th straight UFC fight. And that was because she had established a pattern of winning. And at that point, I was like, holy cow, I want to see if she's going to beat this person in under a minute like she's been doing. And there were a bunch of people in the bar for the same reason. It's amusing that people go, I'm sick of this. And what they don't think of, I've made this point before on the show, Brian, is when you don't think of other fans and other people who might be interested in the thing and use only yourself as a barometer of if it's good or bad, that's where you get into funny takes like you mentioned we're seeing on Twitter.
Yeah, I have no interest in, The Bachelor season 18 or whatever, but I'm pretty sure people like it. It keeps going on, or, pick whatever reality show you want. Yeah, there's a reason this stuff is on TV and it gets paid X amount of dollars from advertisers, right? It's very calibrated how much people like all this stuff.
Well, I won't say it's perfectly calibrated.
No, it's not. And women's sports is a great example.
Well, because this is another tangent on tangent on tangent, Brian, as we are wont to do. Rafi On The Doll broke my heart, man, because you're one of the greatest tennis players of all time. But fuck you, Rafi On The Doll, because he came out, they were talking about gender pay in women's tennis versus men's tennis. And what makes this a fascinating subject is, of all of the different sports, women's tennis versus men's tennis is one of those that actually has a case where they can say there have been times in our history where women's tennis has outdrawn men's tennis. We have stars that are as big in women's tennis as men's tennis. Serena Williams is one of the biggest athletes in the world that everybody knows. So so what he came out and said is, he said, there's a gender pay gap, but he's like, but what people want to see, that's why there's a difference in pay, and that's not our fault. And this was one of those very easy to take a flyer where it's easy to go, hey, just so you're aware, there have been many times that women's tennis outdraws the men's side. And not only that, there are other factors in place, right? If ESPN decide what they decide to put on, this is a problem we've known. So I hate that take where people go, well, people are tuning in to watch what they want to watch. Let's be aware that a lot of, when we're talking about the NBA TV deal, a lot of it has to do with the fact that various networks are willing to give them a platform to show their sport. But what's key is TNT, ESPN. Is it NBC? Is it NBC or ABC? It's got to be ABC, right?
For NBA broadcasts, yeah, it's because it's Disney.
I'm showing what I don't know, but yeah, NBC.
Disney, so to be clear, Disney owns ESPN and ABC, both, so they control those broadcasts.
They own the rights to NBA television. They show NBA television, and then people tune in. So that's the thing, is I don't ever want to use that as an excuse of, well, it's clearly more popular than another sport. It's possible they could pick up another sport. And by the way, this is what happened to hockey. Hockey went on lockout. Their TV deal wasn't secured. They scrambled to find something. They picked up poker. They found out poker was very cheap and very popular. And they said, screw it, we'll just show poker instead of hockey. And that was kind of one of the reasons hockey has never quite rebounded to the level it was at before. So anyway, with that, yeah, I mean, the NBA Finals, seeing it again, not a big deal. Let's see. I did want to talk LeBron James's hand in the finals.
Oh, sure.
So, unbeknownst to us, and I've got another thread to tie to this too, Brian. So LeBron James, after game one, apparently punched a whiteboard. Didn't watch Bull Durham because in Bull Durham, if you recall one of the storylines, Bull Durham was a movie. If you don't know, we quote it all the time in the show, but Bull Durham is one of the greatest sports movies. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And it's about a minor league baseball team, particularly the dynamic between up-and-coming star pitcher who's going to go on to the major leagues. This is a pit stop to the major leagues. And a grizzled veteran catcher who's teaching him the ways of the world, but is also beat down and cynical because he's seen the sports world, knows he's not going to make it, and has to watch a new person that's much stupider than him, but that is going to go make it. And one of the lessons he teaches them is they get in a bar fight, and it's a pitcher, and he says, "What hand did you hit me with?" And he goes, "Left hand." He goes, "Good. If you're going to get in a bar fight, never throw a punch with your pitching hand." LeBron James allegedly injured his right hand punching the board, so he didn't learn that lesson. You're supposed to throw your left hand, LeBron, but was injured the last 3 games and still played really, really well. And of course, the reason they didn't make this public is there's no reason for you to share information about an injury with an opponent. And that makes it kind of sad because you also wonder how well LeBron James could have played. And it puts you in two positions because on the one hand, you're like, that's very impressive. On the other hand, you're like, that's very stupid. But the key to me is also these players, LeBron James and Kevin Durant, more than anything, are human. And we like to pretend that they're emotionless, and that is simply not the case. And on the one hand, I'm like, that was really stupid, LeBron James. Why would you do that on the grandest stage? On the other, man, I don't know how I would have reacted after putting up one of the greatest finals performances in NBA history, having victory almost assured, and then having my teams piss it away by missing a free throw, screwing up a rebound, and then the coach not calling a timeout.
Yeah, I'm not going to say too much about this hand thing because I'm not really clear what's happened yet. Some are saying it's broken. Some are saying it's clearly wasn't because he was doing push-ups in between games, and I just don't know. He played great.
It still is very clear that he was injured on it, and it's a question as to how well he could have played. And he put up, and this is kind of the last point to Kevin Durant's MVP. LeBron James put up the greatest finals performance he has, at least on like a permanent basis in his NBA career. And let me just see if I can get the aggregates up really quick.
I do have the Boxscore Geeks playoff total stats up, and yeah, he produced the most wins in the playoffs by far. He was ahead of Draymond Green and Clint Capella.
But I just want to point this out. So here's the stat line that won Finals MVP and shouldn't seem controversial at all. Kevin Durant on 28.8 points per game led the team, 65.4% true shooting. So LeBron James, for perspective, put up 34 points per game on 62% true shooting. So Kevin Durant shot wickedly efficient, amazing. Kevin Durant, 10.8 rebounds a game, 7.5 assists a game, leading the team. So he led his team in points, rebounds, and assists and shot 65.4%. I'm sorry, you cannot really say there is any reason. If you were going to go with the argument that the winning team gets the Finals MVP, which appears to still be the case, there is nothing to say Kevin Durant didn't deserve it. LeBron James, though, did put up an impressive 34 points, 8.5 rebounds, 10 assists, 1.3 steals, 1 block on 62% true shooting. But yeah, there's really nothing controversial about Kevin Durant winning it. It's kind of impressive LeBron James was able to do that even injured. I think at this point, there's just, I keep saying this, there's nothing left for LeBron James to do. He is the greatest ever. He's just running up the totals. And at this point, his playoff numbers, every playoffs he makes, he just keeps running up the score. So I hope he has another finals run or two in him. I'm excited to see what happens. I think his best bet is Philly. I think he should go to Philly. That's my.
All right, I've got one last thing on the finals before we do talk about LeBron and his offseason stuff. And that is an interesting post on our NBA like 3 days ago. And I'll just read it verbatim. This is from Black Steel 367. McGee, Iggy, Livingston, Bell, and Looney combined 51 for 68, a whopping 75% from the field. Pretty unheard of. I mean, the 4 All-Stars definitely set them up for easy looks and finished, but that percent is pretty insane. So there's a lot to unpack from what this guy wrote here. Number one is that is pretty insane. And coming from these 5 guys who are considered defensive players, basically, right? But what it's really is these guys have always been efficient shooters. It's just, and some of them for a long time, right? McGee and Iguodala especially. Livingston's been off and on, based on injury. He had an amazing finals. Bell and Looney, really great for young players, right, in terms of shooting efficiency. So yes, that percent is pretty insane, and this is partly indicative as to why the Cavaliers had no chance. But then the other side of it here is, the 4 All-Stars definitely set them up. Well, I think it's extremely reductive to look at the Warriors as 4 All-Stars because, like, Durant and Curry are way better than Klay, for instance. So it's, they're not just all widgets. And these players that don't take a lot of shots are really good too and have always played this well. So
I think that entire team minus Nick Young is a fantastic squad. Yeah. And, they lucked into it not mattering that they have Nick Young. I don't know if it's reductive. I mean, I don't have a fault with it. I think one interesting fact about this year's NBA Finals, though, is this is the worst defensive squad that has played in the NBA Finals. This is one of the worst. This is the worst squad on paper that has played in the NBA Finals since like the 42-win Houston Rockets in the early 80s. This actually, let me do another tangent. So I've been trying.
Are you saying relative to the league or absolute?
Both.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Because, they're a 50-win team. That's normally the finals you want, like at least 55. I think the worst team that won a finals recently was the 2000. Let's see. Let me get 2006 up in front of. If you want to do this for me, Brian, to cheat. 2006. I know this for a fact. The Miami Heat were like the weakest seed in recent history to win an NBA Finals. And that squad was, come on, you can load site. So the 2006 Miami Heat were a 52-win squad that I think was placed, by SRS sixth. They were still 6th in the NBA. So it's not like they were horrible, but they're one of the weaker squads to win an NBA title. The weakest, like all time, was the 6th seed Houston Rockets in the mid-90s that won. But, they traded for Clyde Drexler, who we'd argue actually deserved finals MVP that year. So, without a blockbuster midseason trade, there hasn't really been a weak squad that's won a title. And even though they, in theory, had a blockbuster trade, a big problem is, right, they didn't end up using the parts. Like Clarkson, who we don't think is a good player, but is better than some of the other players. He came off the bench. Larry Nance didn't see much of it. This was a bad squad. So it's also funny that we're noting that, the Warriors, like how good those players played. This is like one of the weakest and most beat up squads that has ever played in an NBA Finals. And then, I think it all goes together. They're good players that are playing behind much better players that are playing against horrible players. And that is uncommon in the NBA Finals.
That's right.
And so as I mentioned, I've been doing pretty good about putting out a Monday post. I failed this week because I spent too much time researching, not enough time writing. Brian, classic mistake. But what I've been researching is how fair the NBA is. And so a metric we've used in the past is known as the Null Scully. I might release this post anyway. So the way that works is if you look at a league, the average team in the NBA should win 41 wins. And so there's a comment in statistics, which is the standard deviation. So essentially, within one standard, you want, if you have a standard bell curve, which we're all familiar with from my grades, you want 65% of your points to be within one standard deviation. And then you want like 95% within 2.5 standard deviations. So I can give you a league and say, well, the average in this league is 41 wins. It's an 82-game season. what's the ideal number of what's the ideal standards deviation you'd have? And I think in the NBA it's like 4.53. So basically you would want almost all of your teams to be within 30 to 50 wins. We know the NBA, that's not the case. So the NBA is one of the most unfair sports in regards to that. But if you look at how balanced the NBA was this year relatively, the NBA was actually the 12th most balanced it's been since the 1980, which was the three-point era. So out of 39 years, this season placed 12th in terms of most fair. So, it's in the top third, essentially. So this belief that oh my God, the NBA is broken because of the Warriors, it's lopsided. We kept pointing this out going into the playoffs, Brian. The real issue is just how the NBA seeds their playoffs, because instead of I believe if I was looking at this for the same research, if we looked at the top teams this year in the NBA according to SRS, that simple rating system, which is a strength of schedule adjusted point margin, and point margin in the NBA just connects to wins dramatically. 10 of the 16 squads were out west in terms of top 16. So, if we had our druthers, if the Boxscore Geeks could set the playoff seeding, 10 of the 16 teams that made it would have been from the west. And then here's how it broke down. Number 1 was the Rockets. Number 2 was the Raptors. Number 3 was the Warriors. Number 4 was the Jazz. So 3 of the top 4 squads are out west. 5 is the 76ers. 6 is the Thunder. 7 is the Celtics. 8 is the Spurs. And so of the top 8 squads, that's, 5 to 3. And then, of course, 3 of the top 4. So it's kind of like the better squads. And this is going to get sad. 9 is the Blazers. 10 is the Timberwolves. 11 is the Nuggets. Nuggets should have played. 12 is the Pelicans. 13 is the Pacers. 14th is the Cleveland Cavaliers. 15th is the Wizards. And 16 is the Clippers. So essentially, if we'd seeded it like the way we want, which might be like 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, et cetera, what would have happened in this year's playoffs? 3 would have played 14. We were doing 1 versus 16, 2 versus that. And the Cleveland Cavaliers die in the first round. And then inevitably the Warriors end up playing the Houston Rockets in the finals. So it's kind of like this year wasn't an unbalanced year. The Warriors didn't break the NBA in that regard. The reason the NBA is broken is because the East just sucks. And there are weird reasons to that. Like one of the big ones I'll give you is James Dolan. James Dolan is a horrible owner. And he is a horrible owner in the big market. Now, we know that Los Angeles, for example, in the past has had a huge advantage in attracting big name agents. This is, let's go back. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Shaquille O'Neal, Pau Gasol, Dwight Howard, Steve Nash. Obviously, those two, Steve Nash got injured, so it didn't pan out. But it's like they have attracted big name free agents forever because they're a great market. However, in the East of the great market, no one wants to play in New York because they're a horribly run franchise. So I think there are reasons why there is a disparity between the East and the West. I think Texas is kind of a cheat code. One thing about Texas that's huge, by the way, they have some of the savviest squads there, right? The Spurs, the Mavericks, and the Rockets are all in Texas. That state is also tax-free. So I think they might have trouble always attracting big-name free agents, but it's got to be very lucrative to keep. And we've noticed that, right? There's a lot of loyalty, Dirk Nowitzki and Tim Duncan. And I think a big thing they have in their pocket that people might not take into consideration is they can go, there is zero state tax here. So even if you were going to get a raise to play somewhere else, because we know Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki have left money on the table, for instance, in the past, they go, you are aware that could be like, if you go play in California, that could be like a 10% hit just for state income tax. So there's lots of reasons. But yeah, this year what was fascinating is the NBA wasn't unfair. The playoffs were lopsided. I did look into that. This is one of the most lopsided playoffs since the 2007 playoffs where LeBron James was also blown out in the finals. But that being said, that's just because of a stupid weighting system that they use for the playoffs.
Yeah, no, that's a good summary. I'm ready to move on.
All right, LeBron James, not a lot to say. We're just in full throes of rumor mills. So some of the rumors I've heard, for instance, are he doesn't like Houston as a city.
Came out today, yeah.
What I'd respond with is you don't pay any state income tax. You can live wherever you want. You play half of your games out of the state. And you don't have to stay here over the summer. That would be my take. Go to Austin and get free.
I'll push back a little bit on that, Dre, because I feel like with the way the league is set up, the superstars are expected to do a lot of charity and be part of the community and all that. And if they do just kind of go away and hide, they'll get criticized for it. So if LeBron is in a city, I don't know why he doesn't like it. I didn't hear the reasons why, but if he's like, one reason could be that there's a bunch of rednecks that are racist down here. Maybe he doesn't want to have to deal with all that. So it's plausible to me.
All right. Then there are other rumors. I forget who. Someone was saying that he's already enrolled his kids in school in Los Angeles. It's just a lot of hearsay. All I'll say on this, though, is what's fascinating, that the same was true of Kevin Durant as well. Any big name move like this has had moving pieces for a while now. LeBron James, despite the fact that the rules say he's supposed to, has not been sitting on his hands doing nothing. He has been scoping out teams. Players are allowed to talk to each other during the games and at other events. That's the big conspiracy theory about the big three in Miami is, they played in the Olympics together. But that being said, that's key because it means players do have lots of opportunities to talk to each other and plan things out. So LeBron James is not going to do anything half-cocked. He has, he's had something in mind. The article, where's the article you're at? I can't quite read it on my screen, but I'm liking this.
Yeah, so if you go to ESPN, they're like, here's LeBron Central, and there's a bunch of LeBron articles, and one of them is just a list of the current teams rumored to be associated with him in the offseason. So,
and what's cool about this article is as you scroll down into each new team, they have a new picture of LeBron James in a New Jersey. So I think the point is, wherever LeBron James ends up is not going to be out of nowhere. That being said, bullshit, he hasn't talked to them before, which, by the way, the only team that a lot of people, myself included, have said would be the most perfect fit. So, right, the Philadelphia 76ers they were a 52-win team last year. Ben Simmons is only going to get older. Embiid's only going to get older. Covington, I forget. How old is Covington at this point, Brian? Can you look that up real quick for me?
Yeah, I can look it up. I'm guessing he's like 27 or 28.
Yeah, I think they have a very young squad, and they have a very talented squad that, is only going to get better. Now, it would be ideal if Markelle Fultz did anything, but he doesn't even need to at this point. TJ McConnell's only 25. Young squad, they can afford to just pay him outright, so essentially keep almost everything the same. You could almost just say, if Bellinelli replaces J.J. Redick and LeBron James replaces Amir Johnson, you take that squad. Bullshit if that's not a 10 to 15 win upgrade. And they're in the East still. And as high as everybody is on Boston, and I want to be as well, I keep bringing this up, that Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving both had season-ending injuries, and we have no idea how they're going to come back. And even if they do, that team was a mid-50s squad. Both of those players are very good. But then also you're starting to run into some problems because a lot of the reason that team is good is their backcourt. They have Jalen Brown. I always say Rose, even though he hasn't played forever. Jalen, I'm just going to say Jalen because I almost messed around. Jason Tatum, Terry Rozier, those three players are great. Well, guess what? Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving have overlap. And one of the players that played out of his gosh darn mind this last season was Al Horford, and he's getting older. So I think that team, kind of has some construction issues, and that, it's kind of the same issue kind of the Cleveland Cavaliers had. They had too many bigs, not enough backcourt. The Boston Celtics got a fantastic backcourt, an aging front court. There's only one ball and only so many minutes. So it's kind of like when I say LeBron, the math I said on the 76ers is just keep Bellinelli and let JJ Redick walk, or ask JJ Redick to take a pay cut. So you still have that, guard that can shoot threes, and that's all they need to do. You let Amir Johnson walk. He costs $20 million. You just take that money and you give it to LeBron James instead. I do believe that Amir Johnson played well last season, but LeBron James put up like 20 wins last season, and Amir Johnson, despite playing very well per minute, he only played 1,200 minutes. He put up 5.
He's in his 30s too, I think, Dre. So yeah, they're not thinking about him long term, probably.
Well, I'm just saying, if LeBron James replaces Amir Johnson on that squad and only, I'll put in quotes, puts up like a Chris Paul gentlemanly 12 wins in 2,000 minutes, if he takes it easier to be full health for the playoffs, that team's already like upgraded 8 wins, which would put them at a 60-win squad. Yep. So I think the 76ers make the most sense. But that being said, Colangelo was a problematic GM to say the least. We discussed him a lot last week's show. I'm gonna wait till the dust settles to discuss again. I do want to talk.
He is officially gone now. He was not last week, so that's news.
Oh yeah, so Colangelo was fired. He threw his wife under the bus.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
So I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting if this happened because the story we are basically being fed is that Brian Colangelo's wife created 5 burner accounts to share detailed personal information about the 76ers, criticizing the management, players on the squad, former management. This is Sam Hinkie, as well as like fighting for things that related just to Brian Colangelo. Now, it's possible this is true, but that's very bizarre if that's the case. But so that means they're without a GM. So courting LeBron James is going to be an interesting take. I would love it, by the way, if Sam Hinkie rode back in and recruited LeBron James. However, I think one thing that I'm hearing, which depresses me, is, Sam Hinkie might have left not because the 76ers ownership was mad at him, but because the NBA was mad at him and yes. Adam Silver was unhappy. And they might basically say, you can't let him back in. The reason the Colangelos were inserted there, maybe, they are kind of NBA royalty. Not LeBron. I almost called Arturo LeBron, but I mean, he is like the LeBron of analytics, so we'll give it to you, Arturo. Arturo noted that I think it's Brian Colangelo is still like the head of NBA international play. And
yeah, it might be him or even Jerry. Yeah, Jerry's involved for a long time there.
It's either Jerry or Brian, but there was basically a leak with private information. And so one of the Colangelo still being in charge of that is a major problem. So they had a problematic GM and no GM now. So we'll see. But it's possible if LeBron James has just been talking to like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, he might go there. So that could be huge.
Yeah, I mean, there's rumors about David Griffin, the former Cavaliers GM, who LeBron, I guess, likes, so they might bring him in just to try to recruit LeBron. But I was also seeing a front runner might be Zarin, who's in the Boston front office right now. Or Zarin, I don't know much about him. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
What I love about Zarin, I'll throw this out, is, and I'm incredibly fine with this. This is wise. I go to Sloan and I get photos. I got like a photo with Hinkie last year and lots of photos. Zarin has traditionally been very, just kind of not rude, not standoffish, very polite about it. He's like, I don't want any photos. And I think, to be fair, one reason I believe he's done this is he's in Boston. Sloan is in Boston. He's like, if you take a picture with me, I'm going to be famous, internet famous, and people that are at this conference will know me. And as I mentioned, Sloan has kind of turned into a Comic-Con. So I understand saying, listen, I don't want people knowing who I am because if they know who I am, I'm not going to be able to walk around Sloan freely. I give it to him. I would love Zarin. Admittedly, one of the Sloans I went to, I got to briefly eat at a table with Zarin and Hinkie. So, I think that would be an awesome pickup. And any GM, if they can get LeBron, that'd be huge. I think it's the best. That being said, there's some other names. I mean, let's point out Chris Paul would be great there. Kevin Durant would be great there. There are a lot of names that would do great on the 76ers. So
sure.
We'll see what happens. But just pointing out LeBron, we have no idea. I just think 70. I would put my 10.
He may not know himself yet.
Well, I think he's got a good idea of his options. I think like Kevin Durant was in the same boat. Bullshit like the idea, hey, maybe I should go to Golden State popped into his head. We had so many rumors around that it was obvious that there had at least been some rumblings among some players.
They were courting him for a year or something like that. So yeah.
And okay, so let's get to that next point. So with Golden State, here's the issue we come up on. Green and Thompson are both coming up on extensions. I didn't realize this, but Draymond Green took a pay cut to make sure that they had enough money to sign Durant. And that's amazing. That is an amazing thing to do because one of the things that we were talking about is for Klay Thompson to stay on the Warriors for the contract we're alleging they would try and offer him, he would have to leave $80 million like guaranteed on the table. So, I mean, it's not his price per year might only be be $8 million a year less, but then he might be leaving like a full year at $30 million on the table. And I could see him saying, I'm not going to do that. And I can't fault him because all of the cases in past, the two big names that when I was talking on Twitter today about it came up are Karl Malone and David West. Now, both of these players, though, were well into their 30s, didn't have a ring, and had already accrued, I would say, if it's inflation adjusted to 2018, $90 million in NBA salary. So and just for what it's worth, neither Klay Thompson or Draymond Green has accrued $90 million in aggregate salary. They'll obviously hit that with their next contract, but I'm saying they don't have it in the bank saying, even if I have to retire tomorrow, I already have this. They might be hoping for another contract. We have never seen a player this young leave that much money on the table, and both Klay and Draymond are essentially saying they want the max. And here's the interesting part about Draymond. As I noted, despite the fact that we love him and despite the fact that we give him the credit over Kevin Love, for instance, he has been a very good player, but you can almost look at that 2015 season when they won 73 games as an outlier. If we look at kind of what we'd expect of him, he is a good to great big, but not top. Like I wouldn't put him in the same echelon as, say, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis. I'm trying to think of some other. I'll look up some other names to keep talking. Clint Capella, for instance. Like, I would say Draymond Green, both the funny thing about both him and Klay is at their role and at their contract, they were fantastic for the Warriors. At a max contract, I can no longer say that's true, especially given the fact that they still have to sign Kevin Durant and the rest of the squad. I mean, part of the problem with the support staff of the Warriors is JaVale McGee played great in the finals. Andre Iguodala played great in the finals. Sean Livingston actually played really well in the finals. David West played really well in the finals. All those players are really up there in age, so they actually need to rotate their bench. Sign Kevin Durant. Signing Kevin Durant is priority number one. And so I think the issue is they really can't afford to pay those players that. And a big question I think you're talking about this is, can they trade them wisely? Because I think there is a real arbitrage opportunity. Klay Thompson, right, still overrated. We're still getting in arguments about who Klay Thompson. Like, we'd probably let's see. Let's do a fun one, Brian. So small forward, shooting guard. I would say I'm looking for a younger player. Like, we would say Jimmy Butler would be better than Klay Thompson. We would say Otto Porter would be better than Klay Thompson. So, I mean, imagine the Warriors do that. They go up to the Wizards. They say, listen, we just can't afford to pay Klay Thompson. You're looking to upgrade. We're looking to shed salary while still having a good player. We'll trade you straight up Klay Thompson for Otto Porter, and whatever else needs to make the contracts work. And let me just check up Otto Porter's contract at the moment. Otto Porter is on a roughly $25 million a year deal through 2021. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, it would. So at a high level, here's my problem with the Warriors roster. And to say problem is stupid because it's one of the most talented rosters of all time. But here's their conundrum heading into this offseason. So we're going to assume Kevin Durant is back on a Supermax deal. He's been stating it flatly. Everyone's been reporting it.
It would be a slap in the face to someone who came into your squad, won back-to-back finals MVPs, to not give them a Supermax when they're under 30.
So Bob Myers, the Warriors GM, has said publicly there is no negotiation for Kevin Durant's contract. He's going to tell us whatever contract he wants, and we're going to sign it. And he said he's going to do it. So I think it's going to happen, that Kevin Durant's going to come back on a Supermax deal. Steph Curry is already on one. So if you're thinking about those two players already, one of which is your point guard, right? One of which is listed as a small forward, but really he just kind of does everything right. He does some big man stuff, does a lot of shooting stuff, whatever. If you're going to put two max deals into those two players, I just don't see a way how you can put another max or super max deal into a Klay Thompson, who's another wing player, right? Because the Warriors have this problem this year where, I don't think so when they play this Hamptons Five lineup, I don't think it's necessarily that they drink the small ball Kool-Aid so hard, right? I complain about that all the time, but I really think it's just those are the five guys on their team that they're the most senior and that they trust the most and that they want to have out there on the court, regardless of position, right? And that's fine, whatever. So what's the answer to that if they don't think JaVale McGee or whoever should get crunch time minutes as a center? They have to find some center that they can say, yes, we're going to trust you to play crunch time minutes. So that, I think, is their number one goal this offseason. So when you've already got Durant and Curry signed all that money, which is going to be, well more than half your salary cap, well, you got to spend that Klay Thompson money and potentially Draymond Green money. As you said, good players, but not good players at Supermax. You've got to spend that money somewhere else. Anthony Davis is rumored. Obviously, that's an upgrade. But some other Otto Porter, something like that would be fine too.
So, I mean, I'll be mean because I like the guy. But my take has always been you never want a player on a max deal if they are not a top 10 player in the NBA. Yep. And so like that was even my case about Paul Millsap. I was like, this is a bad contract given all we know, his age, how his production has looked the last few years. But he's never been worth that money, right? At this point, LeBron James, Andre Drummond, DeAndre Jordan, and then we get into a funny scenario too. Where I'm like, there's no reason to give a max contract to a player whose free market value might not demand it. So, for instance, DeAndre Jordan might not be worth it on the open market, but Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic played really well this year. But anyway, like you never want to give max contract money to a non-top 10 player. And we've just espoused how great Draymond Green was, but the whole reason Draymond Green was fantastic is he's a second-year deal that was making less than $1 million a year, that was able to come in and play great as a starter. Even now, he just mentioned he took a pay cut so they could afford Kevin Durant. So essentially, he's been a good to great player that has been worth the money. And both him and Klay are going to tip over the not worth the money anymore, part of the equation next season. And so that's the thing, is if you want to be a smart Moneyball squad, you have to flip that into something. And that's the problem, is that if they spend all that money on those four guys, it's a fun problem. And I actually think a solvable one, where I think the Warriors could accrue an additional 6 productive players at like league minimum. I've always been fascinated by this idea. I think you could do it, right? I think there are enough undrafted players. I think there are enough players, and overseas, I think there are enough discards. I mean, that's one of my points, right? The idea. I was talking to you about this today. That Ben Simmons and Giannis, Free Darko, said that they are great players but hard to build a squad around. And I think that's preposterous, because all you need to do is find like an average shooting guard that can shoot 36% from 3 and you're set. And as an example, the Philadelphia 76ers picked up Marco Bellinelli off the discard pile for $1 million a season. So I think there you can definitely do a squad of like 6 minimum salary players that are productive. I worry that squads don't, and oftentimes they end up doing things like, the classic LeBron James, right? We got a free agent, right? Why don't you sign this 35-year-old veteran who's going to help us out? Why don't you sign this friend of mine? So it's kind of like, I think they could do it. I don't think they would. And I think it would just be easier to say, arbitrage these guys now. Give them what they want contract-wise. Trade them for something better. You know what's out there.
Their value is never going to be higher.
Their value is as high as it's going to be. So I agree.
Because if Draymond played every regular season like he did in the playoffs and finals this year, he maybe, he's worth more money. But he played above his level in the playoffs. So I don't know. Maybe he's young enough still that he's improved for good. But, I think it's unlikely. I think that he is just a guy who's a really good forward. But, you don't want to pay super max to be a center is all.
Certainly.
Well, and here's the point, Dre. So I like your idea of the pay 6 guys the minimum strategy. And the Warriors have kind of been inching up towards that each season, right? As they pick up players like Kevin Durant. And now that the salary cap's not going to go up as much, they can't just keep doing it that way, right? They have to make choices. So one thing I've been complaining about last offseason is they kind of got lucky to pick up all these minimum, as you mentioned, even older big players, or even a young big player like Looney who's been hurt, and just kind of have them all be good, right? So what I'm suggesting is you put a big pot of money into your best point guard Curry, your best forward Durant, and your best center, whoever that is, and then you pick up a bunch of guys from all the positions at the minimum salary, and you kind of spread your risk and your luck around, right? But if you put all your money into your guards and nothing into your centers, you end up like, Boston. So I just think they should be a little bit risk adverse and spread the money around.
I'm going to come back to a point Dave Barry's made before, which is there's nothing that says what needs to win in the NBA. You just need productive players. And we brought up the Brian bins of productivity. You're all about bins, Brian. And I think there's something to that where you can say, look, we're already, like with Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, you're like, we're done with the scoring bin, right? We're done with the scoring and passing bin, right? We don't need to target Kyle Lowry, right? That would just be stupid. At this point, he's an undersized shooter distributor. We've already spent the money on him. Why would we spend money on him? To your point, now what they want to focus on is things like rebound and defense. So I agree that would be a traditional big, but there's nothing to say, for instance, like I would be fine with Jimmy Butler as the wing player. I have no complaints there. I'm just not fine with Klay Thompson and Draymond Green at the prices they are going to command. A contract I'm really interested in, by the way. A fascinating one, Brian.
Okay, let's hear it.
I don't think they'll do this, but here's what I do. Klay Thompson, you go up to the Warriors, or the Wizards. They both start with W, sorry. Otto Porter. Offer him straight up, essentially. Make it look like you got beat, right? Say, we'd be interested in Otto Porter. We'd be interested in Otto Porter and like 2 first-round picks for Klay. Act like it's that. They bite back. They're like the second round. And you bicker back and forth, and maybe you dump Sean Livingston contract on him too. But you get Otto Porter, Klay Thompson on Otto Porter. I turn Draymond into Enes Kanter.
Oh,
Enes
that's interesting.
making 20 million next year, 18 million the year after. Now, what you could do, we talked about Moneyball a little. One of the things that Billy Beane was notorious for in the book was arbitraging relievers. So essentially, he'd find relievers that were undervalued in other people's squads, right? Because like their ERA is high, and the trick of Moneyball they discovered is ERA is a useless statistic. You want to look for WHIP, like basically strikeouts and walks. So he'd find a reliever that was undervalued, pick him up. Then that reliever would look fantastic in their bullpen, and then they would flip that reliever. They'd sell high, and they'd just repeat that process multiple times until the book came out and they couldn't do it anymore. So I think you could kind of do that with like Enes Kanter. You could probably trade for Enes Kanter because I think his value at this point, he's still not even getting full-time starters minutes, which is bizarre to me, right? Actually, no, he is. He did start, but he only got 1,830 minutes this season. He's never cracked 2,000, and a lot of that's just coming off the bench. So I think you could do that. That would be interesting. And I think you could even shed some cap and maybe even get a trade or two in it. So that would be the two moves I would try and make. But we'll have plenty more time to discuss that in the offseason. You brought this up, by the way, on the Warriors, just reinforcing why we think tanking is dumb, or why, and also this reinforces why it's worth putting time into making your franchise a winning team or a team people want to see. According to an article in The Athletic, I'm actually going to sign up The Athletic. It's half price. I'll throw that out there. The reason I'm willing to do that, by the way, Ethan Sherwood Strauss writes at The Athletic. I know that. So it's $2.50 a month, Brian. I'm going to pay for a subscription when the show's over.
That's a good deal. Okay, I'll consider it.
So I haven't read it yet, but The Athletic, this show not sponsored by The Athletic, but we'll say brought to you by.
This is Tim Kawakami, by the way, who's longtime Bay Area beat writer.
Yeah, writes a lot. I've seen fantastic on Twitter, talks a lot about Bay Area sports. But anyway, so I need to read this article in depth, which I haven't done yet. But they say essentially that if we look at the gross that the Warriors brought in for playoff games, and then the fact that we know they take 30% of the gross, they made $130 million from 11 home playoff games. That is amazing. The last playoff data we had was the New Jersey Nets when they had some leaked financials, and they were looking about $1 million a playoff game. So this is closer to like 10 to 15. Now, admittedly, they have conference finals, finals games. I'd be interested to see by series, by game, because I imagine a game 7 is just going to sell out guaranteed. Whereas they might have had to like offer discounts on some of the tickets for the earlier games just to make sure it was full. So regardless, that's like 10 to 15 million a playoff game. And so that's kind of our point, right? When you're talking tanking to maybe get a good player, and we'd argue that player is maybe worth 10 million a year if they're like a star player and it takes a couple of years, versus just becoming good. Now, obviously, becoming good isn't the easiest. I'd be really interested to see the like revenue data for, say, the Milwaukee Bucks, right?
Sure.
Who only lasted one ground, or the Philadelphia 76ers only lasted 2. But it's just like, you look at how much money teams make off the playoffs. It is so much better than leaving a season on the table. So I would love to see full playoff financials for the entire league. But I did love this point that, it really just does make more sense for them to be in the playoffs than not.
Look at it this way, Dre. So let's say based on these numbers, they're grossing $10 million per home playoff game, right? It's not quite that. It's a little bit different, but let's say that's the average over these last few seasons. Then they keep 30% of that, so $3 million per game. It only took them $3.5 million to buy the draft pick that got them Jordan Bell, who's one of the best rookies. So, yeah, if you're like you said, if you're trying to commit arbitrage, you just need to play a couple of playoff games. You could get swept in the first round, still make enough money to buy some draft picks. So, yeah, tanking is crazy. And
it's also what gets funny about the NBA too in terms of rules is there's not really a minor league system, so we have less data on players when they enter the league, and you have to commit to them.
Yeah, and shout out to Andrew Sutton, by the way. I was emailing him about some Doncic stats today. See if you can hook me up with that. So it's hard to find.
So there's definitely that to start. And then additionally, there's a salary floor. You have to spend 80% of the cap. So, the whole Moneyball premise, the reason that was a story that was still, it wasn't quite true. We can revisit it, right? The blue ribbon panel that examined the disparity between like the Yankees and everybody else applied to like a 4-year span. It's the same as people being upset about the Warriors because they've won back-to-back titles. If you zoom out for the entire decade, and I'm even saying the next 3 years, it's going to look way different. But the disparity between how much the New York Yankees are spending versus, say, the Oakland A's was like 5-1, 10-1, I believe. You can't do that in the NBA because they have an 80% salary floor. So all of that comes together. A couple playoff games pays for you to buy a draft pick right out in the NBA draft lottery. There's always a couple of good names that fall farther than they should. And you have to spend the money anyway. So we'll revisit why we don't like tanking. I don't have a ton to say on these on the others, and we've already gone long. You know what, Brian? I'm just we'll just do these kind of shout out format. Kawhi is looking forward to the rumor is that he's sitting down to agree to a supermax deal with the Spurs, and he might magically get better. That also, by the way, does definitely tie into the idea that the Warriors can win another title, because don't forget the Spurs provided a very easy first round for the Warriors, but that was only because Kawhi got injured. What does the Spurs team look like with Kawhi back? So that's huge.
The report is the relationship is reaching the healing stage, so we'll see.
$200 million does a lot to heal things. The Los Angeles Clippers, everything just looks foolish. They're doing everything wrong. You said the rumor is they're looking to shop up in the draft. That's the exact opposite. For what it's noted, this was the NFL draft, but Richard Thaler, Nobel Prize winning Richard Thaler, advised the Washington Redskins, and the advice he gave them is it's probably wise to trade down in the draft. And for what it's worth, we agree with this. By the way, we have I never wrote this piece either. Tons I didn't write this year, Brian. But essentially, every time an NBA team has traded a number one pick in NBA history, it has worked out tremendously well for them. Anthony Bennett was traded for Kevin Love. They won a title. The Boston Celtics just traded Markelle Fultz and lucked into Jason Tatum and a pick next year, right? They've got a top 10 pick next year. So they're a playoff team that has a draft lottery pick. Don't forget back in the day, the Warriors traded for Joe Barely There Carroll. I think that was his nickname, right?
Joe Barely Cares.
Joe Barely Cares.
That was his nickname, yeah. Instead of Joe Barry Carroll, which was his real name.
All right. And basically gifted at least 2 titles, I would argue, to the Celtics. So trading down a number one pick has worked out tremendously well in NBA history. So the Clippers are looking to do the opposite. They're looking to trade up, and also like the Arturo strategy, the smart GM strategy we've said is you just want to shotgun the draft, right? You get as many good names as you want. You try them out.
They currently have the 12th and 13th overall picks.
So they have 2 picks in the top 14. We guarantee you there are going to be 2 names that we like there. So they should draft them both and try them out, or trade down and get like 4. But they're drafting up, and they're probably going to, pick someone stupid. And then the last thing you're saying is it's likely DeAndre Jordan's going to leave, and this is the classic argument. Well, we're rebuilding. You don't want a big-name veteran while you're rebuilding. Whereas we would say, look, F it, try and win 40 games. You're in Los Angeles. If the Lakers don't make the playoffs, you're the only game in town. You can do it. But we just think the Clippers are foolish. I don't have a lot to say on new names. It's a little interesting. Toronto hires current assistant Nick Nurse. That's interesting. Huh. I got nothing to say on this. I'm more just kind of baffled that they just, promoted from within.
Seems like they liked what they're doing, but not Dwayne Casey himself. He gets along with Valanciunas, so it's rumored that Valanciunas will stay, and there may not be a lot of roster overhaul, which we agree with. So sounds like Masai is on the right track here. It's
been interesting where the same thing happened with the Nuggets, where Masai got some big names like JaVale McGee, or bigs, right? So when I say big names, I mean bigs as in the position. And then like George Karl didn't like playing them. So, Masai Ujiri gave JaVale McGee a good contract, and then George Karl wouldn't play him. And the same might be true with Valanciunas. So, and in both cases with Casey and George Karl, Masai didn't hire them, but they were, successful, and we've had that problem, right? It's hard for you to fire a successful coach. So he might have just been looking for an excuse to fire him, and might have been upset, going, "Why the hell aren't you playing Valanciunas more?" So I'll basically say this: if Nick Nurse gives Valanciunas 5 to 10 more minutes a game, he's worth it. Detroit hires Dwayne Casey. We'll have to see this. This does amuse me, by the way, in the NBA, where essentially just being a coach, like your pedigree, it's always amusing just how quick fired coaches get turned into new coaches. And it's because it's just theater. I'm just going to throw this out as a teaser for an upcoming post or podcast topic, Brian, where just the NBA itself is a lot of theater. It's a lot of WWE. And so a lot of, coaches are essentially just like sacrificial lambs a lot of the time. It doesn't actually mean anything. I'm actually going to drop. We had some stuff to say on Kobe. Kobe inserted himself. He said LeBron James needs to find ways to win. he's now Charles Barkley level, forgets his own career. This is nothing new. And all I'll say is I understand why professional athletes feel the need to inflate their own egos because their brand, like Kobe's brand, is valuable to him. So if he's able to make people think he is a top 3 NBA player, which he's nowhere close, I understand the meaning. The question I had, and I brought this up about Michael Jordan too, is, a lot of players, pump up their own image this way. Do they really believe it? Do they drink their own Kool-Aid? And I've heard some people say yes. And so, for instance, the one example is Michael Jordan. It was a convenient lie for a documentary, I forget the exact one, for him to say he was cut from his high school basketball team. It made the story better. But he's repeated it so many times over the years that, it genuinely seems like he believes it at this point, even though there had to have been a point in his history where he knew it wasn't true. So I wonder with Kobe, right? Kobe has said repeatedly, I've won 5 titles. We had to play, he was saying stuff like that. I've won 5 titles. He had the gall to say they've played the first super team in the NBA, which is hilarious. So
that was funny.
Kobe's saying a lot of ridiculous stuff. And the question is, does he believe it? That I have way more to say in it, but we're over time and we'll be looking for topics in the offseason. I'm sure Kobe's not going to shut up. I do not have any, I'll say The Athletic. I'll shout out The Athletic. We already do that. I don't have any other shout outs, Brian. My voice is getting hoarse. I'll let you do your shout outs, and that'll be our show.
All right, I'll do some quick ones. Last thing was on Kyrie Irving, who we talked about. It's rumored that, similar to Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, he will turn down any extensions this summer and go for the Supermax as well after next year. So it seems like players and agents are figuring that out and looking to that Supermax just like Durant and LeBron did. So, yeah, the the Boston Celtics will have one less guard to deal with potentially. Maybe they should trade him, similar to how the Warriors should trade those other players. The NBA draft is coming up soon. We didn't talk about it at all, but we do have college wins produced numbers, I think, from Dave Barry and Arturo Galletti provided them to us a while back, so thanks to them. Of course, Arturo and others will be putting out their actual projections for the draft, not just the numbers themselves. So I'm sure we'll look at those and have plenty to say. So that'll be fun over the coming weeks. And today was the championship parade for the Warriors. So I guess the season's officially over now. There is a great image of Nick Young drinking Hennessy. We won't show it. Let's just take the show out.
All right. Well, that has been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. Check it out. We've been making changes. Patrick has been making changes. Let's give credit to the real MVP. So Patrick, Finals MVP, has been putting up playoff numbers, has putting up player pictures. The site's looking great. Check it out if you haven't. You can find the show on iTunes and Stitchers, the Box Score Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote. It helps us out. We go live every week. It's looking like Tuesday's going to be pretty official now that we're in the offseason, Brian. We don't have to tiptoe around playoff games. So twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers, Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you missed the live show, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. If you haven't heard the word Nerd Numbers enough, I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. With us in spirit, Patrick Mint, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been our show. Order a cookie, and we'll see you next week.